Hello and welcome to a quick weathering overview of how I went about taking care of this BNSF hopper. Here's the model in its finished state, and here is the prototype that I worked from. This is taken off of a BNSF grain train near my home. And here's another view of the model in its finished state, and trying to get as close to the prototype as possible. So we'll start at the beginning. I started with an old Roundhouse car. This is it in its original color, slightly modified details by me. As far as my materials go, I will use just basic water, and I'll also use another cup with water and soap in it so that I can clean the brushes in between colors. I will typically use cheap craft acrylic paints. I'll be using a few different colors here to transition the fade into what I need it to be. And here's a little view of some of the other colors that I have. I use mostly just plain craft acrylic paints. You can see all the different varieties there. I like them because they're cheap. Lots of different colors to work with. So let's get into the color transition here. This was a method shown to me by Gary Christensen. Pretty straightforward. And what you do is you mix the colors to the color that you want the car to become. Then you dilute the paint quite a bit, and you can see that I'm diluting it a lot right there. After it's diluted, you will apply this to the car in vertical motions, as I'm doing here. Now the brush that I'm using is a wide, flat brush, probably about a 1/2 inch wide, and flat and soft, so it makes it easy to apply these strokes vertically without getting things off. It's very nice on ribbed cars like this. I can drop it right between the ribs. So moving ahead, after I've gotten that whole side, I'll hit it with a hair dryer, and that will dry off the paint. And I'm just doing a really light coat here. If you read Gary's tutorial on the weathering shop, he does a little bit more of a heavy coat, and I do that sometimes too, but I tend to go a little bit lighter. And so because of that, it will take me a few layers to get it built up to where it needs to be. And you can see the color change is happening really subtly right now. It's not very drastic at all compared to the other side. So you can see it's starting to turn a little bit more of that almost terracotta color that we're looking for. And fast forwarding again, you can see it starting to change even a little bit more. The hairdryer speeds things up quite a bit. So after you've gotten the car, the base color, to where you need it to be, you'll take a toothpick, and I just got a basic one here. I also have a second one that I use that's blunted, so I can clean off larger areas. I will get the tip of the toothpick wet, dab off some of the extra, and then you just go in and you start very carefully cleaning off the lettering. It's a little bit tedious, but it beats having to re-decal everything. This is what it looks like when everything's cleaned off. You can see the lettering is all bright white again. Now we're going to move on to doing grime. What I'm doing here is I'm going to do kind of an initial grime layer over the whole car. I typically will use water-based oils for this. My color of choice is raw umber, and I'm applying it in the same way that I did the color transition fade. With the oils, they're nice and translucent when they go on diluted, so it's not too heavy. And you can see, after I dry it, it's starting to look a little bit more grimy. It's a little bit difficult to see with the camera. You can see some of the panels I went a little bit heavier on, following the prototype photo. So some of them are a little bit darker, and that's just a heavier wash of that raw umber oil-based paint. Alright, so now we're going to move on to the ribs. My prototype has ribs that are fairly black, and so again I'm going back in with a little heavier coloring of that raw umber. Some of the ribs, if they're very dark, I might mix a little bit of black in there, but normally just varying the strength of the oils will do the trick for you without having to resort to black. So just kind of individually coloring every rib, and I'm varying the dilution. This is what it looks like after I've done the initial grime layers. You can see that it's starting to look a little bit more like a weathered car. Onto the roof walk now. For the roof walk, the prototype has chipped paint. I'll be using a color called charcoal gray, one of my favorite colors to use for weathering. And you can see I've started some of the weathering right there on that roof walk. and as I'm going along, I'm using a brush that has bristles kind of frayed out. It allows me to apply the paint in a little bit of a random manner. And again, I'm referring to the prototype photo here for guidance on where to place things and what parts are chipped. So now I'm going through with a fine brush and I'm hitting the edges of the roof walk. My prototype has paint missing in these areas. Onto the roof, the prototype has an interesting weathering pattern where some of the paint has disappeared or chipped in certain areas, and so I'm replicating that. I like to use a small brush for anything that requires control and detail and things. You'll notice that when I'm painting with this small brush that I always will rest my finger on the side of the car so I can hold things steady. I'm also holding the car in my second hand. I'm not leaving it on the workbench. If I hold it in my hand, I have better control that way. That's just me. Alright, so I've got some of the basic weathering patterns down. Now I'm going to vary the color a little bit. It was just the charcoal gray before. Now I'm mixing in a lighter color called sky gray, and I'm varying the strength on this with dilution. And with that, I'm able to vary the color that's added back onto it. As you can see, the two different kind of shades there. One's really light, one's not. Onto the underframe. With the underframe, they typically get fairly dirty, and so I'm going to be going in with a pretty heavy wash of raw umber water mixable oils, and I will add a little bit of black in here, and you can see that it's a fairly heavy wash, and this is just the first layer. So I'll go through, add everything in, then I'm going to go and dry it, just like I did with the color transition. And this next part here is showing something that I really like to do, getting all the dust and lighter colored dirt that gathers from the bottom. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a brush and just adding plain water right where I want the paint to go, and then I'm taking the paint. You can see I'm mixing up kind of a tannish color like a light mud, and I'm applying it right into the part that's completely soaked with water. And what will happen here is that paint will feather out. The water will kind of carry out the edges, so that you don't get any hard lines at all. It makes it look really, really nice. So I'm going to carry it across all three of these bays. And you can see I get each one of them really wet. Wherever I want the paint to go is where I'm going to apply water. And you got to make sure that you get that paint on when that water is still pretty wet. And so I'll do each bay separately. And after they're all done, you let it dry, and you'll notice when it dries, everything will look nice and smooth. So this car has some patches on it. One way to do it is with an airbrush, but in this case I didn't. I actually just used a normal brush and did a little bit more of that color transition just in those select areas. So I mixed up my paint, the color I wanted it to be, take a brush, and then just make a basic outline of where you're looking at going. And from there, you'll just add successive layers until you get it to the color that you want, and make sure all the corners and edges are nice and straight. To the end cages, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing that I did on the bays, where I'm going to add a lot of water in there, and I will add the paint that I want to feather out and give it a nice smooth junction, so no hard lines. And that'll kind of do it for the base weathering on those areas. Going on to the wheel spray. First thing I'll do is I'll keep the trucks on, measure where the wheels are, and I'll go in with a very fine brush and just kind of make the line of where the wheel spray is typically found. And you can see it there. So I'll start with a lighter color, then go to a darker color right in the middle, and that kind of gives us our basic shape of where the wheel spray is at. Now this next part is how you get the splatter. So I mixed up some very dilute paint on this brush, and watch what I do here with my finger. As I move it across the bristles, it will flick it out. Let me show you here on my glove what that looks like. So in slow motion, I'll take it, and you just kind of flick those bristles, and you'll watch how that paint just sprays onto my glove. So I will do this anywhere where the wheels or anything is going to spray up onto the bottom of the car. Heavy around the end bays, a little light on the middle bay, and I'll change the colors up. So I'll do maybe some raw umber, do some darker colors, do some lighter colors, possibly some gray. Just a lot of different variations, and it gives you a very realistic finish. I'll do the same thing to the end cages, and this is where we're at now. You can see the car is really beginning to take shape. It's starting to look a lot more like the prototype. You know, the color is that nice reddish orange oxide color. A lot of grime, some good dust. So now we're going to go back in, and I will use chalks to get additional dust and grime in those cracks and crevices. And I just grind them up on a piece of sandpaper there. I'm using a soft little snub brush, picking up the colors that I want to add, and I'll go ahead and put them on wherever the prototype shows, typically along the lower sill and a few other places where they typically gather. Now when I've applied them, I will then take a soft Q-tip and feather them out, and that gives us a nice soft edge, no hard lines. Going to the lettering now, I've applied some decals to make this a little bit closer to the prototype, same number and everything like that. Now the prototype weathering is fairly dirty, and so I'll go in and separately weather these, using a small brush, mixing some paint up, giving it a little bit of grime. Again, watch how I'm resting my finger on the side of the car. It keeps things nice and steady. This is more of a raw umber type color here, just a very light grime. Now moving on to the Herald, the prototype has some nice kind of a bleeding going on there. So I'm adding a little bit of white oil paint. Again, this is water mixable oils. And immediately afterwards I'll take a very damp, or not a very damp, but a slightly damp brush and just gently draw it downwards. You can see it'll pull the paint a little bit. Now I need it heavier, so I'm going to add in successive layers a little bit more and just keep kind of drawing it down. And you can see how it's pulling that paint with it and gives it that nice bleeding effect. Now to the graffiti. I'm not going to go too far into depth with this. I'm just going to speed it up so you can kind of see the basic process. You'll see I've got the prototype photo there right below where I'm working, and I'm just trying to copy it to the best of my ability here. I'll typically start with an outline of the graffiti that I'm doing, and then I'll go back in and add colors and do whatever else needs to be done. But I like to have an outline first. I know that other people do it a little bit differently. So here I'm going back and adding some of those colors that I was talking about. And so I'll usually mix one color, work on all that, and then mix the next color, work on all that. Acrylics don't have a great shelf life once they're out, so I will try to use the color while it's still wet and not drying up on me. You can see how that's all getting a little bit closer to where the prototype is. Each tag like this, that's a fairly large one, fairly complicated, typically take me about an hour or so a piece. So these are stretched out over a little bit of period of time. After the larger tags are done, I'll go back in and do some smaller scribbles and things like that. Again, trying to copy prototype photos to the best of my ability. You can see it's starting to take a little bit more shape there. Trying to fade in those colors with each other, so again, there's no hard lines. I want to get it to a little bit of that spray paint effect. After I finish the basic graffiti tag, I will go back through and add any detail on it that I need to do. Typically for overspray effects, I'll use a little oil paint, usually the white oil paint, dab it where I need it to go, and then gently just feather it out, and it gives you that nice kind of overspray. It makes it really look like it came from a spray can. So I'm not going to go into the rest of the graffiti here. It's just kind of the same process, a little laborious. But here's the finished product. This here is the non-prototype side. Kind of worked from several different cars to get that. Back to the prototype side here. Again, here's another roof shot of the non-prototype side. You can see how all that chipping worked on the top there. Also added a little bit of spilled grain as well. A little closer view of the end cages. You can see that nice bleeding effect on that Herald and all the graffiti.